Welcome. I'm Mary Davis Fournier with the ALA Public Programs Office. Libraries Transforming Communities Models for Change is a 2-year ALA initiative in partnership with the National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation. ALA is immensely grateful for funding support from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Without their support, this work would not be possible. We'd also like to thank the Association of College and Research Libraries for partnering with us on this series. We hope that prior to the start of the webinar, you took a few moments to complete a pre-webinar questionnaire that requested some information on your level of familiarity and experience with community engagement via dialogue and deliberation. Thanks for your responses. At the end of this webinar, there'll be an immediate link to a follow-up questionnaire. Please respond to it. All of the learning opportunities for this project are being delivered via webinar, with the exception of a few in-person pre-conferences, and it's just essential that we receive your feedback to best serve your learning needs and also to continue to get funding for these efforts. So thank you. LTC Models for Change is a 2-year professional development project that gives library workers access to free training and community leadership techniques such as coalition building and dialogue facilitation. And the image you see on screen here just lays out the learning schedule for this series, which is tailored to academic libraries. This is the 3rd and final webinar in the academic library series, but we're not done yet. For those who would like to dig deeper and have a chance to try out the National Issues Forum model of engagement that you'll be learning about today, we're offering a free full-day pre-conference at the ALA 2018 Midwinter Conference in February. You see that up there on the screen. Please register and reserve your spot now. There are still spots that are open. And we'll have a couple more specifics on this at the close of the webinar. We'd also encourage you to check out the previous series geared at larger and urban public libraries, and the upcoming series this spring that will be geared toward smaller and rural libraries. Each of them presents excellent models that can add to your toolbox for dialogue and deliberation programs. So before I introduce today's presenters, I'd just like to take a moment to say a bit about why ALA feels that the National Issues Forum offers such strong models for academic library-led community engagement. This nonpartisan nonprofit, in partnership with the Kettering Institute, has for many years published very timely issue guides on major problems facing the nation and the world in our society. They offer support and resources conducting deliberative forums around the country. And their 3 paths to consider approach offers an accessible and teachable dialogue model that quickly gets to the heart of issues while offering clear paths to meaningful and civil interactions between disparate groups of people. They're among the first models that offer, in addition to their issues guides and program models, a platform for effective digital engagement that we will look at the end of this webinar that I think offers some fantastic potential for campus programs. By sharing the National Issues Forum approach with you today, we're hoping that as many of you as possible will try it, adapt it to your work, and we all as a field will benefit from your experiences. So please keep in touch with us about this. So our presenters today are not only expert in National Issues Forum resources and the approach, but they also have a long history of working in the academic ecosystem. I'm going to introduce all 3 of our presenters right now, and then they will take us through this learning. So Ellen M. Knutson is a Portland, Oregon-based research associate with the Charles F. Kettering Foundation, where she's a key member of the research team comprising Russian and U.S. colleagues, developing libraries as centers for public dialogue and deliberation. In her role as an adjunct professor at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, she teaches community engagement in the online master's program. In addition to being a skilled National Issues Forum facilitator and trainer, Ellen's also active with the ALA member group, Libraries Foster Civic Engagement, which has really turned into the community of practice for the field for this work, and also with the ALA Center for Civic Life. Bill Muse is former president of the National Issues Forum Institute. During his career in higher education, Bill served as CEO of 3 major universities over a period of approximately 20 years. He was first elected as president of the University of Akron in 1984 and served in that post until 1992, seeing the university's enrollment expand to over 30,000 students. He also held many leadership posts in Akron, including chairman of the Akron Regional Development Board. And Amy Lee is a program officer at the Kettering Foundation, and she joined the staff in 2010. She handles Kettering's digital strategy and initiated and led the development of Common Ground for Action, which is Kettering and National Issues Forum's online platform for deliberative decision-making that we will hear about more at the end of the webinar. She continues to be the point person for this online platform, which she'll share today with her background in journalism that has included work for the New York Times, as well as the Dayton, NPR, and PBS affiliates, has well positioned her to contribute to foundation work and research in the areas of journalism and civic engagement. So thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to pass the mic over to Ellen, who's going to get us started.
Thank you, Mary. I'm still waiting for my little presenter ball. But I want to, in this moment, take a moment to thank ALA for National Coalition for Dialogue and Deliberation for inviting us to give you this presentation today. Mary, I still don't have the presenter ball. But we'll just go over a very quick agenda that we'll be doing today. So first, Bill is going to talk to you a little bit about what is NIF, which is National Issues Forums, but we will use the abbreviation nearly throughout, and NIFI, which is National Issues Forums Institute. And we'll talk a little bit about how NIF has already been used on college campuses, and then move through a little discussion around decision-making and wicked problems, what kind of problems are well-suited for a deliberative dialogue, and then talk through elements of a deliberative forum. And then Amy's going to round us out by introducing the Common Ground for Action online platform for deliberation, and then some resources and training, additional training that's available at the end. So that's where we're going. But just to get a sense for your own experiences in the room, I'm curious if anybody who is here has participated in an NIF-style forum in the past. If you could just type a Y in chat box if you have, or an N if you haven't, just so we can have just a quick sense for if there's been some experience. So it looks like a few people have experienced NIF before. That's great, and a lot of new people, which is awesome because we love introducing this to new people. So for the people who have experienced it as we go along, feel free to add your own experiences in. The best thing about all of these community engagement models is that we learn best together and through everyone's experience. And then my next question for you is if you have moderated or facilitated any kind of group process in the past. And if you have, in addition to the yes, maybe do a little typing for what kind of group process it was, just so we can get a quick sense for your moderation experience. Great, so somebody's done World Cafe, Harwood-style communications. Great, and all of this are things that you can draw on. The kinds of things that you would do in an NIF forum, you would be doing in any kind of group process. Even if you're doing, say, like leading an information session at the library, or you know, just working with students in general, these are all things that you can draw on. So we'll be giving some new information, but also just know that you already know more than maybe you think you do. And with that, I'm going to let Bill give a little more introduction about NIFI.
Thank you, Ellen. Ellen, Amy, and I will be presenting to you a program that we feel can help you provide students on your campus with enhanced skills and at the same time enhance your position as a center for intellectual engagement on the campus. The years that I spent as a student, a professor, and as an administrator on a campus was one in which I always felt that the library was a source of tremendous intellectual engagement for me. If I needed material for a class I was teaching, or if I needed information for a paper I was writing, I knew I could go to the library and there would be someone there to help me find it and would let me browse around, and it was just a place where I felt very intellectually engaged, and just being in a library provided that for me. So I valued very much my relationship with the library, and particularly as an administrator on a number of campuses, did everything that I could to enhance both the services of the library, the staff at the library, and make it a central part of our campus. Now, as a teacher and as an administrator, I always saw a central objective for each academic field would be to help the students acquire the knowledge and the skills that they need to be successful in the field in which they were majoring and in the field in which they plan to pursue employment after graduation. But we know that these skills that these students can and should acquire skills that go beyond just preparation for that initial job. They need skills that will allow them to advance in virtually any organization that they join, and also skills that will allow them to be a leader in the communities where they live and work. The skills that the students need to acquire start first with critical thinking skills. They need to be able to absorb and analyze important information. They need to see relationships that exist between different elements of that issue, that problem. They need to be able to visualize potential solutions to the problem and then to evaluate those different options before they reach a conclusion as to what action should be taken. The students also need very much to develop their communication skills. And communication is more than just writing a theme or delivering a good speech. Each individual needs to be able to put into words what is in their head and in their heart about things that they value, and be willing to share it with others, and even share it with others other than their best buddy or someone they know very well. But equally importantly, they need to be able to and be willing to listen carefully to what others have to say, and particularly others who may have different experiences and different values from themselves. That is the essence of the communication problem in the developing communication skills. But thirdly, they need to be able to work effectively with others who are different from themselves. And that's the kind of world in which they're going to be working. And the combination of the critical thinking, the communication skills, and ability to work with others will be very important to them when they get out of school. The Kettering Foundation and NIFI have been working together for nearly 40 years to both create a way of talking, a method of interacting, as well as materials to support this kind of conversation. And this is what we call a public deliberation. The process of public deliberation gives each individual the opportunity to speak. It gives, it encourages everyone to listen carefully. It's one in which everyone has equal opportunity to contribute, and it's a system that is extremely important to particularly individuals who expect to be leaders in organizations. The process of public deliberation is significantly enhanced by the NIFI issue guides. What we do is to take an issue, the foundation researches that issue extremely well and presents a guide that describes the issue and lays out at least 3 options that might be considered in order to solve the problem, and to work through that carefully through the structure of the guide in order to reach a conclusion. Now that process will be extremely important to the students once they get out of school, and what you can provide for them is an opportunity to interact with students who are in different majors, different objectives than are those that they are taking in their classes. We have many professors on college campuses who use the issue guides for deliberation in their classroom, but that's typically with students who are in the same academic major. What the library can provide is the opportunity for interdisciplinary interaction, where students in liberal arts can be talking to those in engineering, or those in business and the physical sciences, and that's more akin to the world, the kind of world that they're going to be engaging. Now, we have 2 ways to doing that. One is by bringing together students in a small group or face-to-face discussion. That's something that could be done in the library by selecting an issue, promoting it online or in the library, inviting students to sign up for it, to get an issue guide, either checking it out from the library or downloading it from our website. Come to the forum ready to talk with others about it. We would help train someone in the library staff to be a moderator for these face-to-face engagements. Amy also is going to talk to you. Ellen will talk to you about the face-to-face engagement. Amy will talk to you about the a system we call Common Ground for Action, where students can engage with each other online, and that may be very important to a number of students on the campus. Whichever approach you want to use, again, we're willing to work with you to offer it and to get it right. We want the library to remain a center for intellectual engagement on the campus and to bring together students from diverse disciplines to participate in a process that we feel very confident will help enhance their opportunities for career advancement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. As Bill said, there's been a number of places around the country where we already have NIF activity on campuses. This map here is an incomplete map I will say, because data that I was using to create it last night is about 5 years out of date, so I'm sure some other dots might be added. But I just wanted you to have a sense that you're not alone. When you're getting into this work, you are indeed joining a network. And this network actually goes beyond campuses, but since we're focused on academic libraries today, we wanted to talk a little bit about how this has already been used on campus. And in the first webinar of this series, you may remember that Nancy described a few things that are happening at, say, Kansas State libraries, Oklahoma State, at Rutgers, Illinois State. I'm going to highlight just a few more, but I also want you to be thinking about what partners you have on your own campus already. So not only are you not alone in the nation working on this kind of process, but there's probably folks that you already could be partnering with to bring this kind of work to your library. So if you're thinking about your own campus, who might you partner with to help bring students together to discuss public issues? Partners you may already have, or partners that you'd like to develop on your campus. If you just want to throw some of those into the chat box, that would be great. And while you're thinking about who your partners might be, I will talk a little bit about other places that have been doing this. So first I'm highlighting Colorado State University because Martin Carcassonne, who is the director of the Center for Public Deliberation there, he will be joining me in the face-to-face at Midwinter. So I wanted to give a little bit of a sense of the work that he is doing. So the Center for Public Deliberation there at Colorado State works on campus to train student facilitators, and then they take those facilitators, so student facilitators, into the community to help them work through difficult issues. And he uses the NIF guides in his classes with students as a way to get them thinking about ways that an issue can be framed in public terms. Bill mentioned that a little bit. I'll talk more about that in a moment. And then those students and Martine use those skills to work in the local community in Fort Collins to address issues of local concern, such as protecting the watershed. They did a lot of work around when the college or the university was building a new stadium. As you might imagine, that was not an uncontroversial topic. And likewise, down in Atlanta, at the Atlanta University Center, which is comprised of Clark Atlanta, Spelman, and Morehouse, faculty there have been using the NIF issue guides in their classes in a variety of disciplines, including international business administration, accounting, art, teacher education, sociology, and others. So there's a wide range of ways that this work can fit in. And they began to realize that they could collaborate with each other across these 3 campuses. Again, a little bit of a focus on training students in moderation so they could get those skills, but also just getting students talking about these important issues. So one example was using the NIF issue guide Success in Schools and how we can help more students graduate from high school. And the faculty, when they were reflecting on their work, said that these deliberative experiences really supported the development of their students' civic education. And they found that deliberative forums supported several learning outcomes for preparing students for 21st century challenges, such as gaining knowledge of human cultures, gaining intellectual and practical skills, developing personal and social responsibility, and integrating and applying that learning into other situations. And all of this together gave college students a sense of political efficacy that was applicable to their everyday life and their role in their communities. Myself in my own class that I teach at the University of Illinois, and again, that course is community engagement, I teach it online, but it's synchronous sessions. And that has allowed me to both model and have students practice a variety of different engagement processes, including NIF. Through NIF, we've used the healthcare and immigration issue books, and those topics were chosen by the students as something they were really interested in learning about, and using that as a model for how they could talk about these issues in different ways. And then because I teach online, we've used that Common Ground for Action online platform, which Amy will talk about. So, that is something that also can be used quite successfully with students. And I found that students have took to that online platform pretty readily. And a few takeaways that my students reflected on after their experience of a forum was that they could draw on skills they already had, or in some cases they didn't realize that they had when they were trying their hand at moderating. That as I shouldn't say simple, but as participants in a deliberative dialogue, they found that really wrestling with those tensions and the underlying values was a beneficial way for understanding an issue. And finally, as the quote on this slide indicates, they found ways to start where they are with this work, so not imagining that this needed to be in some idealized position before they could do their work. And then I'm just reflecting on a conversation that I just had with Martine last week. We were both in Dayton together, and he talked about how his students, he would get messages from them in all of the different ways that they used the skills that they had gotten from it in a variety of different settings. So it's highly applicable to a variety of different places and gaining a lot of different skills. So to sum up, on campuses, we've seen NIF, deliberative dialogues, used to train student leaders as a learning tool for deeper understanding and for deeper understanding of a topic and to weigh in on decisions affecting the campus. And finally, as a way of supporting the civic and professional education of students. And with that, I want to pause for a good cause and a cat picture. To see if you have any questions about NIF before we launch into when and how to use deliberative dialogue in a little more detail. And I'm also scrolling back through the types of partners that you might have on campus, and I think all of these are great. Student activities, community relations, yes, the different student centers. All of this is great. All right, if you come up with questions, I mean, at any point, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll either answer them as we see them or at the end if we miss them. So I'm going to bring up this slide that you might remember from the first webinar in this series. It's the NCDD Streams of Practice. And I'm trying to get my pointer. So the deliberation really falls in this decision-making area of the streams of practice. At its core, it really is a decision-making process, a way to encourage people to carefully weigh their choices with the goal of coming to sound judgment on an issue at hand. And with that in mind, I'm going to talk first about a general model of decision-making because I think it understands what is going on in the deliberative practice. So Sam Canner created this diamond of participatory decision-making. It's in he and his co-author's book, The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision-Making. And I think it really lays out the full process of when you're facing a difficult and complex issue. Unfortunately, oftentimes we stick into our comfort zone, or what is labeled here as business as usual. And here people are refraining from taking risks. The ideas are drawn only from familiar opinions. And it is true that for some decisions this may be all you need, but when working with a complex public issue, staying in the comfort zone likely is going to result in a decision that few are happy with. And far too often, voices are shut down too early, or only the articulate or confident are heard. And there are many very good ideas that die or simply never are aired because a person that came up with them were either quiet, intimidated, or inarticulate. And as a facilitator, when you're trying to get at difficult issues, you want to try and push the group towards the divergent zone. And when discussions move into this zone, that's where diverse perspectives are encouraged. A facilitator is creating a supportive atmosphere that's really encouraging people to speak freely, following their curiosity and looking for discovery of new ideas. Thinking outside of the box, sometimes we'll call this. And there's a number of techniques that help support divergent thinking, such as brainstorming, maybe writing things out before you're talking, breaking people into small groups, finding ways to use anonymity for getting these different ideas out. If people may feel more safe to say crazy things or things that are out of the normal business as usual if they don't have to own it at the beginning. But after you're sort of got this broad view, you don't want to stay there, because staying there, that's where it seems like we can never come to any kind of conclusion. We've got all of these ideas all over the place, what's going on. It's really, after good divergent thinking comes that difficulty of managing the numerous ideas. And it often places groups in what Kanner labels the groan zone. Why? Because it's simply not much fun. It's hard work when you're really wrestling with all of these different ideas, the trade-offs, even trying to figure out, like, are we even going to go anywhere? Are we just going to stay all over the place? A good deliberative framing can help lay out the trade-offs and tensions, and good facilitation can help create that shared understanding and the integration of the new ideas that help move people past the frustration. I mean, getting past the groan zone can take time, but it is the place that facilitators must practice and encourage the group some patience, some perseverance, and tolerance. Once you've made it through there, you're in what Kanner has labeled the convergent zone. And there's where the group has developed a shared framework of understanding. And if you've done a good job with the divergent thinking, made it all the way through the groan zone, here you're clarifying, consolidating, refining, and prioritizing all of these ideas. All right, but the good news is that the NIF issue books hopefully have done some of this work for you. So they should have sufficiently captured divergent thinking, and because their framing focuses on those underlying values, it may help with that wrestling a little bit more. And then at the end, you come to closure, right, or decision points. Many processes may be primarily about educating participants. Even on campus, NIF guides aren't always used to actually come to a specific decision. It may be just about educating in that process and a different way of thinking and talking with one another about these important issues. So you may not have a decision point. In other situations on campus, the decision might not necessarily be coming from the group, but that group is being used as an advisory to the decision makers. Some sort of authority may make the decision after considering that discussion. Generally, though, being clear from the beginning what your process is for and what its aims are is going to be important. And although this decision-making diamond that Kanner lays out he's laid it out as for any participatory decision-making, I think it is helpful in understanding where and how a group is when using a deliberative forum. So now I'm going to delve a little more deeper into deliberation. And again, here's another chart you might remember from the first webinar of this series, the difference between debate, dialogue, and deliberation. And in the last webinar with Essential Partners, they talked about really good uses of dialogue and when dialogue is important and how that's going to help you get through something. And now in this webinar, we're focused on deliberation. The NIF model encourages people to weigh in on public issues where decisions have to be made. And for some, this is a really different way than the others that they have experienced when thinking about public issues. So if you think about ways that a person may have engaged in public issues before, they may have engaged at a public hearing, at a school board, at city council. Deliberation is really trying to move beyond this kind of 3 minutes at the microphone or serial presentations, but really getting at a way that people are actually talking together and exchanging ideas. Again, it's also not a debate. You're not trying to win over somebody to the other side or say how something is wrong, but looking for that common ground for action. Or I've also think about it sometimes as that area between agreement and disagreement, where there may be space for generated ideas to be generated together. Again, so it's a place. Oh, I can't move my slide. Okay, there we go. A place where we're thinking together, weighing the choices, trying to come towards a sound judgment. Bill indicated this in his talk. I'll just reiterate that public deliberation, people identify multiple options to a central issue. They're weighing costs and consequences of each of the options and determining what the community values, whether that's the campus community or the wider community, and trying to look for that, again, that space between agreement and disagreement, where we might find areas that we can find some common ground, and really thinking about what kind of future we might want for our community. So when do we use deliberation? I'll start out by saying if an issue has a technical solution, it's probably not a candidate for deliberation. So, for instance, sending a man to the moon, complex and difficult, yes, but experts and technicians working together can probably tackle it. But there are other types of problems that experts, technicians, haven't seemed to have make much headway in. I've often said that if experts could solve our problems alone, more of them would be solved by now. There's a lot of really good people out there really trying to make headway. A couple of urban planners, Riddle and Weber, and I didn't send this to Samantha earlier, so I'm going to put in their a citation. They coined a term, wicked problems. And they used that to describe the kinds of issues that I think public deliberation is very suited to address. So we may not even know what is exactly at issue. You know, is it about, if we're concerned about education, is it about we don't have enough teachers, is it about inequitable funding? I mean, there's all kinds of things going on in there, so we don't know what's at issue. And there's also disagreement about the causes of the problems. You know, is what we're thinking about is about homelessness, or do we really need to focus on job development? You know, there's just not definitive or single solutions to these problems, and that's what's making them wicked. And with these wicked problems, any actions that we take may result in other problems. And you know, so there's trade-offs and downsides to them. They may not actually even be able to be solved in my most pessimistic views of the world sometimes, but only managed. I mean, they're ongoing, they're systemic, but we certainly need to do something about them. Another way that you might be helpful in thinking about what kind of problems are good for deliberation comes from Ronald Heifetz in his work on leadership, adaptive leadership, and I'm going to put in a citation to his work. And he comes from the medical field, so he discusses the difference between how you might treat a broken arm versus how you treat diabetes, where a broken arm seems more technical, there might be a bit more of a technical fix, but with diabetes, you need to you're managing that with the participation of many different actors, right? So the doctor, the patient, a nutritionist, grocery stores, public parks may have a role. There's a variety of actors in the community that need to weigh in order to manage this problem. And so that's also something that is important to be thinking about when what kinds of problems are good for deliberation. So having laid that out, can you think of some problems on your campus that may be a good candidate for a deliberative forum? And just type that into the chat box. I know when we looked at the free speech versus hate speech, that's definitely one that how can we wrestle with the values that are in that? What are we doing around monuments, perhaps? Buildings that are named for slave owners on our campuses. You know, is it about history and tradition? Is there? So yeah, all of these are great. And one of the things that all of these types of issues have in common is that there's values that are competing with one another. So I want to do a real quick exercise with you around values. I'm going to start out with the preamble to the Constitution. So here it reads, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." In this preamble, there's some values that are laid out. Now, without getting into too much of a historical debate about what the framers meant, I did take a look at what was said in the preamble to how we might talk about these values today, right? So justice, still justice, domestic tranquility, we might talk about as security and safety. The general welfare, we might talk about as equality. Liberty to ourselves, we might talk about as freedom, and liberty for our posterity would be freedom for future generations. Now, if we take each of these on their own, let's take a look at justice. Who here prefers justice over injustice? If we were in a room together, I'd have people do a show of hands. And I think that it's pretty common that people will prefer justice over injustice. Likewise, thinking about security, would you prefer to be secure versus being fearful of your life, right? So that's another issue. And just keep going down the list. Most people feel like equality is an important thing, as is freedom. What makes us different is not whether or not we hold these values, but how we rank them, how we apply and define them, and when they're in competition with one another, which one dominates for us. So that's why I'm asking, you know, in the chat box here, if you could say, which is your top value? Which of these, just these 5 values, are you unwilling to give up? Which do you hold most dear? So I've already had a few people label justice as their top value. You'll see security, equality. Right, so you'll see that these, each of these values are being labeled as, for somebody, the thing that they hold most dear. Now that we've had some thinking about our top value, let's think about what value might you be willing to give up a little bit of, especially if you had to give something up in order to maintain that value that you hold most dear. So which one are you most willing to give up? Right, and so even in these first bits, you've seen that some people are willing to give up something that was another person's top priority, that they're most like not willing to give up. And that herein is the rub of why working through these issues can be so difficult. And why is it important? Because sometimes these values are in conflict with one another. One thing, I was just traveling, so you know, going through the TSA line is definitely a tension between security and freedom, right? Those are often in tension with one another. Freedom and equality may be in conflict with one another, especially if we're thinking about the economy in a capitalist system. You know, is it my freedom to make as much money as I can, right? Or do I need to give some of my money to others so that we can have more economic equality? These values are in tension, and democracy is full of these inherent tensions. And ideally, communities can be involved in this constant process of engaging with the tensions and working through them. But unfortunately, most public discourse simply isn't framed in that way to engage those tensions. More often, we hear somebody highlighting a particular value, justice or safety and security, making an argument for actions that support that value, and implying that if you don't support the action, you also don't support that value. And that's where we end up in these polarized debates, why it gets so frustrating, public dialogue, or it may not even be dialogue, public shouting. But if we can apply a deliberative or wicked problem frame to put the focus on those tensions, we can go a long way to reframing those issues. And that's what we're trying to do with these NIF guides, right? So broadening out the way that we talk about these issues, not in terms of the polarized states that we often hear these issues talked about, but in ways that is getting at those underlying values and tensions. Here's a few guides that have been published in more recent years. Again, thanks Samantha for posting to where you can see all of the guides that have been produced. There are guides that are produced on current issues. There's also guides that are been produced on historical decisions, just as a way of getting people to understand how throughout time, when we've had to come to these decisions, there are still tensions in the values that we held true. All right, so going to stop for a brief sum up again. We've looked at why coming to a decision is hard work, that groan zone, what kind of problems are best suited for deliberation, and how surfacing competing values help change the framing of an issue. So I'll just go real quickly through how this gets put together in an NIF-style forum. So there are multiple roles that get played in a forum, a convener, moderator, recorder, participants, and the issue guides. So the convener is there to do the behind-the-scenes work, figuring out all of the logistics of what it takes to host that forum, inviting the participants, doing any sort of PR outreach that needs to happen. The moderator is there to help this dialogue go forward. You know, I've listed a few qualities of a moderator that are good, trying to remain neutral in terms of the topic of the issue, encouraging people to tell their stories, actively listening to what they're saying as a way to help participants understand their differing perspectives, and also maybe being traffic cop in managing time, shifting the focus when necessary so that each of those options in the guide has a fair hearing. Something that moderators are not or don't have to be is the authority on the topic. So you don't have to know everything there is to know about immigration in order to moderate a forum on immigration. And a moderator is also not someone that is there to shut down differing options, right? So it's not like the moderator of the comments on a news story or a blog post. You're not there to say what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in terms of a perspective, but really to help the group do its work in understanding these different perspectives. That being said, there isn't a particular one right way. This is an art form. It's not a science. There are different ways that many people have found moderating to work. Could be in a very hands-off way, just interceding as necessary to be sure that you're staying on time. Could be a person who is more like an interviewer and really posing questions to the group and probing them to dig deeper. Devil's advocate, being sure that the voices that are not in the room are brought into the room, especially if you're hearing that it's not a lot of diversity in the room or weaving together all of the different ideas that have been said. A moderator may be all of these different styles, even in one forum, depending upon how the group is going. Again, there's not a right way. It's just how you feel comfortable and what works for you. And when you were looking at earlier in this forum the different ways that you've already facilitated groups, you can pull on that experience in this NIF version as well. The recorder, this is one that some people think is an optional role, but it's a way that you're capturing, in a visible way, the thoughts of the group. And sometimes that can be very useful to refer back to on what's been said, if there's wide agreement or wide disagreement, if there are trade-offs that the group seems to be willing to make, the recorder can be capturing these things. If you're interested in really taking a deep dive into the learning more about the nuts and bolts of convening and moderating, recording forums, you can check out the webinars that we did through the ALA Center for Civic Life. And we'll also definitely be focusing on these in our face-to-face at Midwinter, so I hope that some of you will be there. But let's also not forget about the participants. You don't want to throw a forum and have no one come. So this is where your partners are important, the ones that you listed earlier, figuring out ways that, who can help you get students into the room, but also thinking about the topics, thinking about having the pulse of, what is meaningful and on the agenda of the audience that you want to bring in. And then finally, the issue guides, which really provide a nice framework. I keep talking about, this developing the framework in a way that is getting at the complexity of the issue and getting at the tensions that are not just between the options, but also the tensions within the options. In the last webinar with Essential Partners, they talked about how important it is to uncover complexity in issues, and that's something that's a good thing for dialogue. It's also something that we try to do with deliberation. It's really, these aren't easy answers. It's not yes or no. It's not you're with us or against us, but it's about, the real complexity and digging in. So if we just take a quick look at the Safety and Justice Issue Guide, it is saying that many Americans are concerned that something's going on with violence in their communities. There's something going on with law enforcement, and there's something going on with race. It's all undermining the national ideals of safety and justice. So now how do we unpack that? That's what this guide is trying to do. I recognize that these words are very small on the screen, but Samantha put a link so you can see it if you can download it later. But the first option is saying top priority should be finding ways for communities and police to work together to stop violence of all kinds. Really, the value that this option is looking at is safety, you know, and bringing that out. On the one side, there are all of the examples of actions that could be taken, and then there's trade-offs to consider. But you'll notice that there's white spaces too, because the idea is that the group should also be coming up with examples of things that could be done and what trade-offs they're wrestling with. Option 2 in this is really based upon the value of fairness, right? Saying that only by addressing basic injustices and implicit bias in law enforcement and the courts can safety for all actually be achieved. And again, there's a list of actions and a list of trade-offs to consider. And then finally, in the third option, it's saying that the law enforcement officers are now being asked to handle a range of problems that go well beyond what they should be responsible for. So this is getting at when we were talking about the wicked problems of not even having agreement on what the problem is. So this is saying, hey, there are a lot of underlying causes to violence, and we shouldn't be talking about violence. We should be talking about what do we need to do to prevent it, to deal with the underlying causes that cause violence. A big thing to remember, though, is that these guides are just a tool to help open up that conversation. Although we lay out, you know, 3 or 4 different options to consider, the purpose is not at the end of the forum that people vote for their favorite option. It's not, you know, all about option 1 or any of the options for that matter. In fact, the hope is that in that end, you were talking about the 4th option. Pulling together, these aren't mutually exclusive things, pulling together all of the things that we think could be done, should be done, and the trade-offs that we're willing to live with, where those, working through those values. So we've pulled together our convener, moderator, recorder. We found some participants. We've got a guide. How does this look like? There is a stages of a forum that seem to work. It's always good to start with welcome. We like to offer up some ground rules. Essential partners called these agreements. Use what works for you. Some sample ground rules that have worked well for folks in the NIF network are on this slide, but these aren't the only ones. You might have additional ones. One that I always like to use when I'm holding any kind of community conversation, whether it's a deliberation or not, is to assume best intentions in a speaker. So there's a lot that you can add, but it's good to lay them out for the group and get buy-in from the group. And then we found in an NIF forum that it's a good way to get people talking about what is their personal stake in the issue. And then only after the personal stakes have come out to move through the deliberation on each of the options. And then it's always important to leave time at the end there for that reflection on what we've achieved. Sometimes people get way into the deliberation and shortchange that ending of the forum, but that's really where some magic happens. And then finally, there is a questionnaire that we ask people fill out and send back to NIFI. So this is the page 1, the front and back questionnaires on safety and justice, also available online. And one question that often gets asked is what do these questionnaires get used for? They're ways that we can compile at NIFI forums that are happening around the country. If you remember that slide of the map, this is one way that we get a notion of not just what happened in Illinois, but what's happening around the country on the forums. So, pause for another good cause and a dog picture. Let's see what your questions are. So how much time should be allotted for a forum? I would say that at least 2 hours. Some people will use a 3-hour forum. Partly it's knowing what your audience is and how much time they can take. When I know faculty who've done this in the classroom, sometimes they break it up over a series of classes. So, you know, not doing the whole forum all at once. So there's a variety of ways that could be achieved. All right, there's going to be some more time for question and answer at the very end. And now I'm going to hand the ball over to Amy to talk about how this is looking with the online platform.
All righty. So I'm assuming everybody can hear me. And yep, see people nodding. Awesome. And now I have a little ball. Well, hey, everybody. It is very good to talk to you all today. As Bill said, I'm super excited. I'm also excited to go last because I get to build on the excellent work that Bill did introducing the idea of deliberation and its importance in democracy, and then Ellen's really awesome explanation of when forums are useful, how they're done, and all those things. I'm going to build off a lot of what Ellen just talked about, because the most important thing to remember, I think, about Common Ground for Action, which is the name of the platform that we developed, is that it basically is National Issues Forums Online. We designed it in a collaborative process with the NIF network to mirror the deliberative process, but we also believe that it can work for anybody who is interested in holding these kinds of discussions. And because we know that sometimes it can be a little harder to do these things online than it can be in person, we built the platform to do as much as possible of the work for you. So Ellen mentioned how the framework does a lot to kind of frame the conversation in an in-person one. Here you have the framework, but also to make it more interactive than, say, you know, sometimes like certain message boards or certain kinds of, you know, like not very well taught online classes where there doesn't seem to be like clear directions for what to do or lots of opportunities to interact. We wanted to avoid that, but nor do we want it to be super interactive in a completely crazy open way, like say YouTube comments or even certain Facebook pages. So we tried to strike this balance between enough structure to make it productive and fun, and then also openness enough to where it could be used by a really, really broad swath of people wanting to do forums for any kind of purpose. So what Common Ground for Action is the online platform that you can use to hold national issues forums. It can also be used for other kinds of framings, but they all have to be NIF style, which basically means more than a couple options. So what does this actually look like? When we decided to build the online platform, we wanted to make sure that it would have all the affordances necessary so that you could have forums online that were just as deliberative as the ones that Ellen was talking about in person. So we knew that it needed to be multi-person. This is a little bit of a choice, and there are some trade-offs that come with it when it comes to doing in the online space. You cannot just log onto your phone like you do for Candy Crush and go in and deliberate about a topic, because the exchange is what 30 years of in-person forums have taught us is really crucial. Ellen highlighted the importance of participants in a forum, and even though we've been talking a lot, assuming that librarians would be the moderators, the participant experience is really the crucial one. And so there need to be several of them in order to have a forum. So it's multi-person, it's synchronous, which is another thing that is a little bit unusual in online. Most things are chosen to be asynchronous. You can do it whenever you want. But for deliberative forums, the most important thing is for people to be able to hear about how other people are coming to their decision, the kind of experience and stories and narratives that have shaped their decision making, because one of the big outcomes of forums that we see is that when people talk to each other and realize that someone else is valuing security and then equality and then some other value, it's not because they are bad or crazy, it's because they've had different experiences that have led them to do that. And the only way that we have seen that happen really consistently is when people are talking together, not when you're coming into a space, stating your case and getting out, or posing your most provocative or your most well-reasoned argument, but when you're having a conversation. We also knew that it would need to be visually engaging because we're not going to have all the nonverbals and kind of social cues that you get from an in-person. So we've tried to build that in, as I think you will see in a little bit. We tried to make it intuitive. This is tough work and it's kind of hard, and again, you're working without nonverbals, so we tried to make it as intuitive and straightforward as possible. At the same time, we also wanted it to be really interactive because, as Ellen said, these forums take a while. And if you think 2 hours is a long time in person, it is about 1,000,000 years online. And so we wanted to make it interactive so that we knew that participants would be able to see in real time that they were doing things that were having an effect on the conversation and on how they experienced the platform as a group. And then lastly, we knew that there needed to be a payoff. Again, for spending that amount of time. And so that's why there are a couple of tweaks to this where Common Ground for Action online forums are just slightly different from in-person forums. So let me go ahead and go through the stages of a forum. So this looks very similar to what Ellen was talking about. At the very beginning of it, where she was talking about going over ground rules, giving people a roadmap, and establishing personal stake, that all happens in the lobby of the forum, which I'll show you in just a minute. Then people go on to a first activity, which is called a baseline top 5, which is where they choose the 5 actions from across the entire framing that they would do if they were, queen or king for a day. And then they go ahead and, like in an in-person forum, examine the options one by one. And then at the end, they do a common ground reflection, and they are able to see not only where they had common ground, where they didn't have common ground, but also the difference that their deliberation has made, that payoff that I was talking about. And they do this work in a mixture of doing work individually and also online, or not online, individually and as a group. So they start off at the beginning, your individuals hitting a link, and then you use your personal stake to kind of establish the group and establish ground rules and things like that. Then people do some individual work, but they always come together to deliberate upon each option, and then at the end, the reflection is entirely group. So this will make a lot more sense when we get to the pictures, which are now. So here is the lobby of a forum. This is what happens when you are invited to a forum, you get a link sent to you, and you hit that at the appointed time. So you can see what participants are doing is they are chatting over here. This is where the moderator would post the ground rules and the roadmap for the forum, explain, the order of things that we'll be doing it in. And then people are encouraged to fill out their personal information over here and their personal story right down here. Then when you want to read the personal stories of others, they show up in the little avatar circles right underneath the chat bar, and you can read the personal stories of others. And this is really, really important. Not only does it set the tone for how people are going to be talking, that we're going to be talking from our personal experiences about how we have come to our positions, but also that we understand the diversity of experiences that might be in the forum and any that might be missing that we might need to kind of supplement using our imagination and perspective taking and things like that. So the lobby is the first thing that people go into. Right up here in the center, I took this screenshot after, but it's normally a how to participate video. You can send that out to people beforehand, but they can also watch it in the platform. Here in the center, they can download the issue guide, and if there is an issue video associated with it, they can watch that as well. But basically, this is where the group becomes a group. It becomes a group that's going to consider an action or consider an issue together. So after that personal stake, and you've answered any questions and people feel confident that they know where to type and how things work, then you put people into the baseline top 5. And as I mentioned, this is what an individual person would choose if they were president for a day. So I choose my top 5 issues and I just drag them over here, Over at the right, it's a very simple kinetic kind of process. We're trying to accommodate as many different styles of learners and experience as possible. So everybody is doing this individually. This just takes a couple minutes. It's to mostly get people familiar with all the framework, so the option stuff goes faster, but also, again, to have kind of a baseline of where people are starting from. The next thing is that people, all the different participants as individuals, take a look at the actions that are associated just with option 1. So this is from a healthcare forum where they're talking about the options, and one of them is that we need to kind of rein in the spending that we do. So these are just the actions that are associated with option 1. So again, what participants do is they take a look at the actions and they say, well, I think we should do that, or conflicted about that, or I think we should not, that wouldn't work, or that's not a good idea, or whatever. They do this work individually where they're looking at the actions, and then they click the button over at the top right to hit next, and they go to looking at the drawbacks, the part that hardly anybody ever wants to do for the actions that they like. And so again, the process is the same. This is part of kind of keeping it intuitive. We tried to have as few kinds of actions as we possibly could so that people could just kind of learn them and they'd all be the same and consistent, so that there wouldn't be a huge learning curve for every single one. So participants take a look at those actions that they said, oh, I think we should do this. Well, can I live with this drawback? Or does this drawback conflicted? Or now that I think about it, I can't live with this. When every individual has finished this, has hit the next button up top, then it goes on to the deliberation, the group discussion of the option. And so what you can see here is that the platform takes those individual evaluations and anonymizes and amalgamates them into a map of where the group is starting from. So from left to right, it means that the further to the right you go, the more that there is support for the action and acceptance of the drawback. So if it's all the way over here at the very farthest right edge, it means that people support the action and they can accept the drawback. Where A is, it looks more like people support the action, but some are conflicted about the drawback. Over here, it might mean that people are kind of conflicted about the action as a whole, and way over here would mean that people don't even support the action. And then from top to bottom, what it means is the level of agreement there is within the group. So if it's way up here in the top right corner, it means that a huge percentage of the group agrees. They all have the same feeling. They support the action and they accept the drawback. If it's here, it means a huge number of the group is conflicted by it. And if it's over here in the red, it means a huge number of the group agrees that they hate it and they don't want to do it. And the point of this is not so that that you should register all your opinions just by changing your evaluations, which you can do at any time. If anybody says anything in the chat that makes you rethink how you're evaluating an action, you can change it and the graphic will update in real time. But the point isn't just so much to do that, it's to get the point of the forum is for participants to share their experience with each other about why they feel the way they do. And if it turns out that you convince someone and the group and more common ground is created, great. But the point of this is to identify where there is common ground and to really think deeply about any potential unintended consequences and trade-offs, and it's to think about why this would happen. So if you have a group that is very like-minded, you may need to kind of play devil's advocate a bit. If you have a group that's all over the place, you want to kind of help them to understand why that is, like how the group can be thinking so differently about this, and tie that again to things held valuable. And if the group is even agree that they just really don't like an option, they don't want to talk about it, you might have to encourage them to think, well, can we think of anybody who would be thinking this way about an issue, and what do we think is driving that decision making? Because again, our goal is to seek kind of understanding through this. So you would repeat the same mixture of individual evaluation and then group discussion for options 2 and 3, just lather, rinse, repeat. And then at the end, there are 2 screens. One is this common ground reflection. So what you can see here in the center in this green box is that any action that has more than 75% of the group both supporting the action and accepting the drawback shows up in common ground. So it looks like this group has a lot of option 2 in common ground, but not incidentally, a little bit in option 2 and 3, and a little bit in option 1. So what's important to this group is not only the value underlying option 2, but also some consideration of option 3 and a little bit of the value underlying option 1. And again, the point of this is not to say, okay, yay, this is our final score. This is what our group agreed to. Let's all write our congressman. The point of this is for the group to understand that this is a complicated problem, and that this is where they have common ground, and how, if we as citizens and policymakers took these actions that are in common ground that are agreed to, would we be satisfied? Do we think they go far enough? This group has a lot of common ground. Many groups don't. So we might say, hey, it looks like we were only able to agree on a couple of actions as being really, really actionable. Do we think that that would have the impact that's necessary on this problem? So again, the graphics are just there to kind of support the group's reflection and meaning making about the complexity and the values underlying this issue. The very last thing is that payoff I talked about, which is where the group is able to actually see the difference their deliberation has made. So screen is much the same, but what they can also see here is the group's final top 5. So this includes any actions that are in common ground for action, whether they had 3 or 5, or it includes 5 of 7 if they had 7. But here is the group's initial top 5. This is what would have happened if the group if we had just kind of averaged or summed together the average of everybody's individual baseline top 5s. And so a lot of times you'll see some similarity, but you'll also see some changes as people start to consider trade-offs, and this shows people the difference that their deliberation has made. You can also, participants can see their own personal individual top 5, and what's interesting here is that a lot of times there is not necessarily huge amount of overlap between a person's individual, their personal top 5, and the group's final top 5, and yet they've chosen fairly high satisfaction. So I think that really speaks to the kind of transforming power of this kind of conversation that people can have with each other. So one last thing before I will open this up for questions, before I click open the chat bar and do that, I will just mention that it is very simple to learn how to do these for people. We have an all-online moderator training. The first thing you do is participate in a forum as a participant, so you see what you're trying to facilitate for other people. And then the second part, you get credentials and take the wheel and go ahead and practice moderating. There's a script that explains all what the graphics mean and gives people kind of real basic instructions just to kind of make it easier and save your typing fingers and things like that. But we have a lot of support materials related for that. We actually have a number of open Common Ground for Action forums coming up. We would hugely encourage you guys to participate in those, or to, we actually would like to do one just for librarians coming up. We're kind of nailed down the date there. And then the last thing is that if you have any more questions about this besides what I've answered here or what I can get to in the next little bit, you can also find a lot more information at the link that I just posted into the chat. And it's also in that resource sheet that Samantha put together. So I see that. How much time should be allowed? Oh, nope, that's from Ellen's question. So if you guys have any more questions, you can go ahead and chat them to us. But I will, in the meantime, turn the ball over to Samantha so that she can help us handle Q&A and wrap up.
Thanks, Amy. I think Samantha is actually going to get the ball over to me. It's Mary. And thank you so much, Amy, Ellen, and Bill. I have a few more details to share before we're able to just break for questions. And this is just a general resource slide that I'll start with the bottom first, the Common Ground for Action Moderator training that Amy just shared. We will email you any librarian-specific date that we're able to come to, and we're working on that with National Issues Forum. We will email everyone who was a live participant in this webinar with those details, and I believe Samantha's already sent out the link, which I'm sure she'll post again about that. Ellen mentioned the ALA Center for Civic Life webinars. Here's the link for it that get a little more into facilitation best practices and some library-specific experiences with this. And of course, I'm also going to say that all the webinars, in case you're just signing on to this one, are available on the ALA Libraries Transforming Communities website. You can access all of them for this academic library series. And please reserve your spot now. Ellen Knudsen and Martine Carcassonne will be the fantastic trainers at the in-person pre-conference workshop. It's entirely free. Please sign up today to participate. We do ask that you complete the entire academic libraries web series to participate and claim your badge that helps us track participation, that everyone is fully prepared for the in-person website, for the in-person workshop. These are some instructions to just log on to Credly and claim your badge, and we'll be emailing those out to folks who register for the in-person workshop and as part of our post-webinar communication after we're done today. Again, I'm going to entreat that all of you please fill out the post-webinar evaluation because it is essential to the work that we're doing. And I am going to probably just scroll through resource slides while any questions are being posted and really invite Ellen and Bill and Amy to answer any questions before we say thank you and goodbye today. And you don't need the presenter ball in order. You can just unmute from our presenters in order to answer questions.
Thank you, Mary. And I'll just also want to point out that on this question slide, we have all of our email addresses listed. So if you think of questions in the middle of the night, you can shoot us an email and we'll respond that way as well.
I will jump in to answer the first question, which is that the normal length of time for an online forum is 90 minutes, especially if people are experienced, 2 hours if they are not. Again, there is a way that we can talk you through in moderator training where you can break that up if that length of time isn't possible for you to do. But I would say 90 minutes it goes fast. It feels rushed. 2 hours is pretty perfect, but it depends again on the experience level of your people.
Well, this is Mary. I have a quick question while folks are getting things together. And that is, I realize that we've talked about this primarily in the context of working with students, and I'm wondering from the presenters and from participants, if any of you have had experience working with community groups from the vantage point of the university library or extension learning audiences or doing programs of that sort? Or are you all thinking of this in terms strictly of working with students?
So I will just say that in my first slides when I was talking about other ways that this has been used on campus, some of that has been very focused with the wider community. So almost all of the work that Martine does at Colorado State is focused on the Fort Collins community. Now he uses the students as the moderators for that, so there is the learning objectives for the students that gets met through this. But then in terms of the actual deliberations that go on, it's focused on the community. Others have been also focused on just on the campus, but not necessarily just students. It could be the whole campus community, right? So faculty, staff, and students in the issues that they're facing together.
Great, thank you. And I see Pamela Price is saying that they've partnered with the local public library for joint online catalog. That's fascinating. Because they don't have funds for, saves money because we don't have funds for recreational reading, so that community residents love this outreach. I have to say that's another aspect of this work that it has so much potential. Thank you, Pamela, for sharing.
Right, and there's been a lot of work in NIF also with the public libraries, so that can be good partnerships as well between, you know, the university library and the public library that's in town as well.
We have also done a lot of forums with churches, with resident centers, with all kinds of different community groups, in addition to higher education.
Great. And one last question, how can we find out if any of our local colleges and universities are familiar with National Issues Forums, Institute's forums?
So on the NIF website, there is a network partners page, but also that's, as anytime you put something on a website, it's immediately obsolete, right? Where it's, you know, such work to keep things always as up to date as possible. So also you can just be in contact with NIF and we can link you together with people in your campus, or if not on your specific campus, maybe there still may be somebody in your local community who might serve as a good partner. I don't know if you want to add anything, Bill?
Yeah, just email me and I can tell you if your university is connected and who you should talk with.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that is all we have time for today, and I thank you all for your attention, your participation, your great questions, and for being here with us today. And also thank you so much to our presenters from the National Issues Forum Institute, Ellen Knutson, Amy Lee, and Bill Muse. Also our thanks to IMLS, to ACRL, to PLA, and to our Models for Change Advisory Group for their guidance, as well as my colleagues behind the scenes, Lois Sharp, Samantha Oakley, Brian Russell, and Sarah Ostman for their support of this webinar and the library's Transforming Communities Models for Change initiative. Again, this learning webinar has been part of ALA's Libraries Transforming Communities initiative, which addresses a critical need within the field by developing and distributing tools and resources to support the work of engaging communities in innovative ways. Thank you all. And go register for our in-person pre-conference at ALA Midwinter if you're attending or are in that region. It'll be fantastic. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Samantha, and thanks to everybody who helped us practice this and get it all ready.